Hey, good morning, everybody. The papers that you have in front of you with the Hebrew and English is the first half or so of the Rambam's introduction to Mishnah Torah. So what I would like to do is ask you all while you're eating to just take a few minutes to browse through it and just become familiar with it, see if any particular thoughts come to mind or any particular sections stand out, and then we'll go through some points together. Okay, before we start, any particular thoughts or questions come to mind?
When it refers to each person.
Excellent question. Thank you for bringing that up. I was a big part of the class today will be focused on that. Mark is pointing out that. Okay, so just we back up a second. So this is the first part of the introduction of the Rambam, in which he is describing the chain of tradition from, as we say at the very beginning of Pirkei Avos, Moses gets the Torah from Sinai and passes it from generation to generation. And there seems to be an emphasis on so-and-so gets it from so-and-so to so-and-so to so-and-so, but we have the Besden. The Besden of each of those people, so Yahushua, say David HaMelech is part of the chain. He is he? I think he's part of the chain. Yeah. Right? So it's not just David HaMelech, it's David HaMelech and his Besden. And by the way, I'll point out that there are a number of exceptions to that rule. If you look at it, so firstly, okay, starting off from Yahushua. Yahushua gets it from Moshe. There's no from Moshe and his Besden. Now, even though Moshe definitely did have a Besden, Moshe had the 70 elders who he was the head of, but it doesn't say that Yahushua got it from Moshe and his Besden. Yahushua gets it just from Moses. But from Yahushua and on, it's always the plural. It says, Kenim Rabbim, many elders received from Yahushua, which are what we refer to in Pirkei Avos as the Kenim, the elders. And then from then and on, there's always the plural. So Eli gets it from the elders and from Pinchas. Shmuel gets it from Eli and his Besden. David gets it from Shmuel and his Besden, right? And so on and so forth. And at some point, it actually switches to not just so-and-so received from so-and-so and his Besden, but it switches to so-and-so and his Besden received from so-and-so and his Besden. So in the beginning we have the Besden enumerated just on the transmitting side of it, and then somewhere during the flow I add that the Besden is also there on the receiving end of it. I'm not sure, I don't know why that switch is, but you can see that switch happens. Amos, Yeshaya, Yoel, it's just the very last one. Okay, so that makes sense maybe. Ezra based. From Ezra. Ezra based Dinoi. Ezra and his Besden. If you're looking, there's no page numbers, but it's page 3, the end of the third paragraph in the English. Ezra and his court received the tradition from Baruch ben Uriah and his court, and then it explains how Ezra and his court are referred to as the Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of the Great Assembly. And then from then on, after the Anshe Knesset Agdola, we're always referring to so-and-so and his court, received the tradition from so-and-so and his court. So I'm not sure why that change is made, but we will be addressing about why is the role of the court so essential here, why does the Rambam keep on emphasizing that? But before that, so thank you for bringing that up, Mark. Okay, let's...
And it says when it says Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai.
What page are you on?
Same page, middle looks like.
Yeah. Rabbi Yochanan mentions the five students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, even though only one of those 5 students is, because if you look at the end, I don't know if everybody got to the end, but at the end he says, thus there were 40 generations from Rav Ashi back to Moshe Rabbeinu. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4 in that until 40. In that list, there's no Besdens. It's only all in the singular. So and so from so and so from so and so from so and so. And there, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's 5 students are not mentioned. There's only one of them, I think, who's. In fact, is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai even in that list? No, he's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's.
Had 5 students.
Yeah, but I don't even know if his. Yeah, I don't know if Yochanan ben Zakkai is even in that list, is he?
Yozer and Yosef ben.
No, you have Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, we'll get to that. Fine. So let's go back first to the beginning, where it says Moses receives the Torah. And then look at the top of page 2 of the thing. It says Moshe Rabbeinu personally transcribed the entire Torah before he died. He gave an entire Torah scroll. He gave a Torah scroll to each tribe, and placed another scroll in the Ark of the Testimony, as Devarim 31:26 states. Take this Torah scroll and place it beside the Ark, and it will be there as a testimonial. So there's 13 tribes. We're counting Menashe and Ephraim as 2. Moshe writes 13 Sifrei Torah before he dies, and he gives one to entrust to each Shevet. This is explicit in the Bible.
But
You look
a
at
scribe, a sofer today takes a really long time to write a Torah. How did he get 13 of them done?
that's because they have inflation.
No, he was in the desert for 40 years.
No, but Rashi does actually say that this was a miracle that happened.
Okay.
That he wrote 13 Sifrei Torah on one day. I don't remember offhand where the Rashi is. And in fact,
task.
It
if I
actually
recall
says
correctly,
that? Wow.
He wrote with one with the right hand and left it so that he cut a little bit half the time just by doing that.
there's actually another question, because the question is, did Moshe die on Shabbos? If he died on Shabbos, that would be a bigger problem. Anyway, okay. No, but it could be Hashem gave him the commandment to do it, so it overrode Shabbos. Okay. So what happened? So there's 13. 12 of them get to eat tribes, and the Sefer of Shevet Levi gets put in the Aron. Yeah, there's a machlokus in the Gemara if it was actually inside the Aron or if there was a protruding shelf out of the Aron and it was on that shelf. But upon him, that Sefer Torah was put away as a testimonial. He says, a testimonial in the Aron, and the Medrash brings this in Psikta on Parshas V'Zois HaBracha, Psikta Darav Kana, where it says, Rabbi Noya B'Shem Rav Huna says that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 13 Torahs, 12 of them gave to the 12 tribes, and one for his own tribe, the tribe of Levi. She'im bikesh echad min hashvatim la'akir davar echad min ha'Torah. If one of the Shvatim would seek to uproot something from the Torah, the tribe of Levi would bring out their own Sefer Torah from the Aron and correct the forgery or whatever from their own Torah. So in other words, Shevet Levi and this Sefer Torah in the Aron is there to preserve the authenticity of Torah. If anybody tries to make any change, whether he's smashed from the Medrash deliberately, but it could also be, over time people make mistakes. So if you ever want to know what's the 100% accurate, you don't know exactly a certain word of the Torah, the Sefer Torah in the Aron is always there to refer back to for 100% accuracy. Interestingly, 2 times in history where this seems to have actually been relevant. Number 1, there's a Gemara in Moed Katan. Reb Rich recently finished Moed Katan, and then in Moed Katan, in the end of Moed Katan, it talks about in the beginning of Moed Katan, it talks about all the laws that you are or not allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. So one of the things it says in the Mishnah, it says, Ein magiin ois achas afilu b'sefer Ezra. You're not allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. We're not going to get into the practical laws of writing on Chol HaMoed, but you're not allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. Even one letter from the Sefer of Ezra. Rashi says, what's the Sefer of Ezra? The Sefer Torah of Ezra. Ezra, the leader of Israel, Ezra was Ezra Sofer. He was right. So he has a Sefer Torah, which is very reliable. And in fact, the Rambam in chapter 8, I think, of Hilchos Sefer Torah, he talks about, I think, if I recall correctly, he references Sefer Ezra there, where it's connected to the Keser Aram Tzoiva. How do you say that in English?
The what?
The Keser Aram Tzoiva, the Tanakh that's many people say is the most reliable one. What's it called? All right, whatever.
What's the word you're saying?
Keser Aram Tzoiva, that's what it's called in
Aram
Hebrew.
silver.
Anyway, whatever it is. Okay, so that's what it means, that even you have a Sefer Torah, you want to correct it because you've seen that in Ezra's Sefer Torah, the more accurate one, it says, so you're not allowed to do that in Chol HaMoed. Then Rashi says, V'ani shamati azara behei. The word Ezra is spelled Ayin Zayin Reish Aleph. If you make one change and you say it's not Ezra, it's Azara, it means the Sefer of the temple, right? That even if you want to change a Sefer Torah, not to edit it from the Sefer of Ezra HaSofer, but to edit it from the Sefer of Moshe Rabbeinu, Azara, then you wouldn't be allowed to do that on Chol Hamoed. Now, another reference to this is in Melachim 2, chapter 22, where we have the whole story, famous story maybe, of who was it? The king Chilkiyahu HaKohen. He finds the Sefer Torah, and he gave it to Shaphan, and they found and they read from the Sefer Torah, and this was part of reinstituting after a long period of neglect and of Judaism and serving idols and all that stuff, where Judaism was rejuvenated. A bit of an ignoramus of Nach, but I'm pretty sure this is the story that's also referenced in the beginning of Yirmiyah, where Yirmiyah was a child when this story happened. He witnessed this. Is that right, or am I completely off? Anyway, so over there, that's in Melachim 2, chapter 22, verses 8 and on. And over there, the Radak says that basically what happened was that the Radak is Rab David Kimchi, is one of the primary commentaries on Tanakh, and he says that this was after the 55-year reign of the wicked king Menashe, where the Torah was all about forgotten, and they went into the Beis HaMikdash with the intention of refurbishing it, and while they were there, they chanced upon this Sefer Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu had put into the Aron, into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that's what's going on over here. Okay, let's move on. Let's go back to our source sheets, again, page 2, and let's read this carefully. The mitzvah, i.e. the explanation. So the Rambam is saying that this Torah and mitzvah, Torah refers to, in this context, to the written law, and mitzvah refers to the oral law. The mitzvah, i.e. the explanation of the Torah, he did not transcribe. Instead, he commanded it verbally to the elders, to Yahushua, and to the totality of Israel. As Deuteronomy 13:1 says, Yishar Melecha, be careful to observe everything that I prescribe to you. And for this reason, it is referred to as the oral law. Okay, now, even though the oral law was not transcribed, Moshe Rabbeinu taught it in its entirety to his court, to the 70 elders. Elazar, Pinchas, and Yeshua received the tradition from Moses. Okay, so here already we see Moshe teaching it to his entire court. Then it says, in particular, well, it doesn't say in particular in the text, that's added in, right? Moshe transmitted the oral law to Yahushua, who was his primary disciple, and instructed him regarding it. So there's
What does that mean, instructed him regarding it?
Thank you for asking that question. If I don't get back to it in a few minutes, remind me. But the point is, both Steve and Mark, the point over here is every single word in the Rambam has an exact meaning, and he has an agenda in those words, and there's nothing just, right? So both of you picked up on very important points. But if you just look at this paragraph, there's 3 different types of transmitting or teaching that are mentioned here. Firstly, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu taught it. Limda is the Hebrew. He taught it to the entire court and to the 70 elders. And then we have that Elazar, Pinchas, and Yeshua received the tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu. And then we have Masara Yeshua, which is also the language Pirkei Avos, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, uses, that Masara, he transmitted it to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Yahushua. So there's 3 things going on over here. There's teaching, there's receiving, and there's transmitting. By the way, if you look in the Gemara where it talks about the Seder of how Moshe Rabbeinu gave over, so it explains in detail the whole thing. First he sent it to Aaron, then to in that list, Pinchas and Yahushua are nowhere to be found. It talks about Elazar. Elazar is mentioned in that list, but Pinchas and Elazar are not in that list. So the Mefarshim ask, well, where does the Rambam get this from? That why does he single out Pinchas and Elazar? More than the Gemara does. So the Meiri says that it's very obvious. It's the Medrash says, the Gemara says Elazar and his son. Aaron and his sons. So Aaron and his sons means Elazar and Elazar and his summer. But Pinchas was a grandson. So he says, okay, Elazar, Aaron and his sons includes also his grandson. And Yahushua, it says explicitly in the Torah, Lo Yamush B'Techa Ohel, he never left Moshe Rabbeinu's side. So if he never left Moshe Rabbeinu's side, then clearly he was there when this happened.
But those three things are not the same.
The three things of teaching, receiving, and transmitting.
Yeah.
They're not the same. Very good. Okay, so let's address that. The agenda of the Rambam in general, when this whole part of the introduction, is to demonstrate the truth of Torah, the reliability of the tradition that we have, right? And that's what he says. We have 40 generations, so and so to so and so to so and so to Moshe Rabbeinu to God, right? And with every single one of them, he adds the Besden. As we pointed out before, with the exception of Yahushua. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu has a Besden, Yahushua doesn't receive from Moshe and his Besden. Yahushua receives from Moshe Rabbeinu. Mm-hmm. And Steve, that's the words you just pointed out. And again, sometimes the exact meaning can be a little bit obscured in translation, but that's what this means. He transmitted the oral law to Yahushua v'tzivahu aleho, and he, maybe a better translation would be, and he entrusted him with it. So, specifically Yahushua. So even though Moshe Rabbeinu taught Torah to everyone, and even though there's three levels of it, he taught Torah to the whole Jewish nation. Specifically the Sanhedrin, the 70 elders, and the Elazar and Pinchas, they received from Moshe. So they were in a closer niche of students than were the rest of Israel. But there was one person who was entrusted with the responsibility of transmitting the Torah in its entirety from Moshe Rabbeinu to the rest of the generations. And that was Yahushua. And that's what this means. He transmitted, that's the only time we have this word, he transmitted the Torah, he transmitted the Torah to Yahushua and entrusted him with it. V'tzivahu aleho, he entrusted him with it. And we're going to get back to that soon. We'll add more detail to that soon.
Transmitted doesn't necessarily mean saying, right?
Well, transmitted means that he transmitted and entrusted him with it, means that Yahushua is taking over Moshe Rabbeinu's role, absolutely. And by the way, there's another thing that Yahushua and Moshe Rabbeinu have in common that no one else in the history of our people have in common. And by the way, this is going to be Mashiach too. Hopefully we'll see if we have time. We'll get to that.
Eliyahu's WhatsApp statuses, you'll know this already.
Right? Yeah. Yahushua and Moshe Rabbeinu were the only two prophets of the Jewish people that were they were the king and the prophet. After Yahushua, we have the period of the judges, where there's no king, and from then on, the roles of king and prophet are split into two. Right? Mm. Moshe and Yahushua were both a prophet and a king. Mm. Right? So, and I hope to have time at the end to tie this back to Moshiach.
Well, David was also a prophet, no?
Well, he had prophecy, but he wasn't the role of the prophet of the Jewish people. You had Nasan Hanavi was the prophet, right?
What I'm seeing is that Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Shivim Zikanim, right? But when it comes to being Moser, the Torah, transmitting and entrusting someone,
Yahushua.
That's only Yahushua.
Exactly.
So he did do something with others.
Of course, that's the thing. Everybody's taught from Moshe Rabbeinu.
And then after that, we keep seeing the lashon of
The
Kibbutz.
Besden. After post Yahushua, it's everybody is receiving from the previous generation with the Besden.
But you're not seeing the word Masira anymore.
Correct.
But it seems that there's another level too, because Elazar, Pinchas, and Yeshua
Very good. Zokt Reb Rich. What about Elazar and Pinchas? Maybe we should say Reb Shimon. Zokt Reb Shimon, especially when the week of Lag BaOmer. Zokt Reb Shimon. What about Elazar and Pinchas? Now, if you notice, Elazar and Pinchas, they're up there in being, they all received from Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? If you look at the end of Elazar, Pinchas, Yeshua received the tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu, and then the next paragraph says that Moshe transmitted it to Yahushua and entrusted him with it. Right? So, on the one hand, we're saying they all three received from Moshe Rabbeinu, so we're kind of extolling the virtues of their virtue, but we're singling out Yahushua. Now, if you look at the end, where it says the 40 generations, so right at the very end, look at numbers 37 and on. 37, Eli receives from Pinchas, and who does Pinchas receive from? Doesn't say Pinchas receives from Yahushua, from Moshe. It says Pinchas received from Yahushua. Because even though Pinchas did receive from Moshe on some level, but after Moshe Rabbeinu dies, Yahushua continues with the development. Okay, so I'm kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself. We're going to see soon in the Rambam that there's three functions of each generation that receives and then passes on the tradition. There's three functions, right? First of all, you're receiving the written law. The oral law. The oral law says in the Torah, put on tefillin. What's tefillin? We have no idea what tefillin are. The oral law tells us it's 4 paragraphs, it's square, it's black, right? That's the oral. So number one, the transmission of the Besden, and if you look throughout the Hakdama, it's very clear that the Rambam is trying to emphasize these 3 steps. There's number one, transmitting the oral law, the tradition which we spoke about in the very first paragraph, that Moshe Rabbeinu receives the mitzvah, the explanation of the mitzvah. That's number one. Number two is things that they derive with the 13 principles. That means, if a question arises, is this type of blood pure and impure? And we don't know the answer from tradition. So then the Sanhedrin, the High Court, the 70 elders convene, and they utilize the tools of the Shloisha Semidas, the 13 principles with which the Torah can be expounded, which we say every morning in davening, and they all convene and they figure out, okay, you know what? We don't have an explicit law that tells us this, but we have a Kal V'chomer, we have a Gzeira Shava, we have one of the other principles that from here we know that the halacha in such and such a case is that this woman is pure or that this woman is impure, and then that now becomes part of the Torah that is now passed on to the next generation. Right? So, and the third thing is takonos ugzeros, institutions or decrees that the Sanhedrin of each generation see necessary to do. So, for example, came a certain time and Shlomo HaMelech decides from now on we have to institute Eruv. You can't carry or whatever it is without an Eruv. Comes a certain time along and David HaMelech, based on the whole story of Amnon and Samar, decides we now have to forbid Yichud for a single woman to be in seclusion with a man. Beforehand it was only forbidden for a man to be in seclusion with a married woman or a woman who would be forbidden for him to marry, but a man with a single woman who he would be permitted to marry would be allowed to be in seclusion. David HaMelech made a gzeira from now on that's forbidden, right? So that's a third thing which the Sanhedrin of each generation have to assess the situation of their constituents, their generation, and see which takanos, make Purim, make Hanukkah, make Tisha B'Av, right? Which takanos and gzeiros need to be made now, and they enact them. So again, we have 3 things that the Sanhedrin are responsible for. Number 1, the oral law. Number 2, new things which have been discovered or deduced using the tools of the 13 principles. And number 3, new decrees and dakonis, institutions, read the Megillah, wash your hands before bread, don't carry without an Eruv, those type of things which each court decides based on the needs of that generation and passes on to the next generation. So when it comes here to the Pincha, to number 37 and 38, on the one hand, Pinchas did receive from Moshe Rabbeinu, But Pinchas also, he wasn't the transmitted. Yeah, it was Yahushua who was transmitted from Moshe Rabbeinu. And don't forget, Pinchas lives a long time after Moshe Rabbeinu dies, during the reign of Yahushua. During all those years of the reign of Yahushua, there are new things which are discovered. There are new things which are discovered through the the 13 principles, or new decrees and takonis that are made, which are numbers 2 and 3 of the 3 things that the Besden are responsible for. So Pinchas's tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu is not complete. In order for him to have a complete tradition to pass on to the next generation, he needs to incorporate also that which he has received from Yahushua. So that's why in numbers 37 and 38, it says Eli receives from Pinchas, and Pinchas receives from Yahushua. Because even though Pinchas also received from Moshe, but in terms of being the one to pass it to the next generation, it's Pinchas and his Besden from Yahushua. Yes?
Isn't there a point where Moshe Rabbeinu forgot everything and then had to relearn everything?
We're going to get to that. Not exactly, but we're going to get to that. And then number 39. No, number 4. One second, I'm missing 38. 39 didn't come on. 39 is cut off from the paper, but 39 is Yahushua from Moshe, and then number 40 is Moshe Rabbeinu from God. Now, if you notice, by the way, that over here Elazar is not in the picture. So when the Rambam mentioned Elazar, he was just telling us about Elazar, because Elazar's whatever, he gets a token mention. Now, obviously, nothing that the Rambam says is just token, and there's certainly a good reason why it's necessary for the Rambam to say it. But in the tradition of 1 to 2 to 3 to 40, Elazar is nowhere to be found.
So,
Yes.
after these 40 generations, was that when the decision was made to write down the oral law?
The writing of the oral law already happens within the end of those 40 generations, but the end of those 40 generations is what the Rambam refers to as the Chesimus HaTalmud, the sealing of the Talmud, and that was, according to the Rambam, the last time that there was a single, unified Besden that is binding upon all Jewish people. Afterwards, you have, what we know now as Sephardim, Ashkenazim, Minhag, your Minhag, but already went then to.
It was based on your community.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I saw an interesting var just to understand the role or the status of the leader, the transmitter of the tradition in every generation, is that the Rambam starts off. We have Torah B'chsav and Torah B'al Peh, the written law and the oral law. The written law, how do we make sure that gets transmitted safely from generation to generation? We have the Sefer Torah in the Aron. How do you make sure the oral law gets passed on? That's Yahushua, Pinchas, Eli, right? So we have this two sides of the coin of the Torah, Torah B'al Peh, Torah B'chsav, and we have the Sefer Torah and the head of the Besden of each generation. Just a nice imagery to think. Now, where does the Rambam get it from that Yahushua is the transmitter? By the way, it's interesting. The Rambam says the words to Yahushua, who was his student, and perhaps the Rambam is alluding to the fact that it says in the Gemara that the reason why Yahushua was Zoicha merited to be the to receive so much from Moshe is because he was he worked very hard on it. He was Meimis Atzmei Allah. Rashi says in the beginning of Pirkei Avos, he really toiled, and literally means he put himself to death on it, but it means he gave his whole life for it. He was Leyomush B'Techael. He never left Moshe Rabbeinu's side, so he kind of deserved it. And perhaps the Rambam is alluding to that when he gives Yahushua this honorific Shahu Talmidah. He is the Talmud in the singular of Moshe Rabbeinu. But be that as it may, where does the Rambam get it from? Where is this told to us in the Torah? So the truth is, in the Torah, you have a number of times the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu is mitzaveh Yehoshua le'inehem. He, let's say, commands Yehoshua in front of the Jewish people. You have it in Bamidbar 27, that's in Parshas Pinchas. You have it in Vayelech, in Dvarim chapter 31, and there's in a number of other places I think too. It's a few times in Vayelech. That word Va'atzaveh. So what does that word Va'atzaveh mean? So the Ramban says that on a Pshutei Shal Mikra level, on a just to read the pasuk, you could interpret it to mean that he was giving him over, transmitting the leadership of the Jewish people to Yahushua, as the king, as the telling them what to do, like Parnos to tell them what to do. But the Ramban brings a Medrash Sifri, and I think it's in a number of places in Midrashim that word Vatzaveno refers to Divrei Torah, that I'm passing this on to him, not just passing on the leadership of the Jewish people to him, but passing on the transmission of Torah to him, and that's where the Rambam gets this from. And just another interesting reference which is mentioned by the Brisker Rav. This is a Brisker Vart at the end of Parshas Beshalach, which is what we read on Mark's birthday, on Purim. We have the war of Amalek, right, Mark?
Yes.
So over there, it says, "Vayomer Hashem al Moshe k'sov zeis zikaron ba'sefer v'sim ba'oznei Yahushua ki mochei emcha zecher Amalek mitachas hashamayim." God says to Moshe, inscribe the story of how Amalek attacked the Jewish people as a memorial in the book, and recite it in the ears of Yahushua, etc. So we have here two details: write it in the book, and put it in the ears of Yahushua. So the Brisker Rav says this is the allusion that recited in the book. That's the transmission of Torah Shebechsav, of the written law. The Simba Ozne Yahushua, put it in the ears of Yahushua, is
Oral.
Torah Shebaal Peh, which is specifically to Yahushua. And here we come to what Avram mentioned about the story. So the story is like this. It's a Gemara in Tamura, I think. Let me see if I can find the exact story. Hold on. Here we go. It's a Gemara in Tamura, number 16a, where it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu died, there were 300 halachas which were forgotten in the days of the mourning of Moshe Rabbeinu. Amdu kol Yisrael la'ageres Yeshua. So the people wanted to assassinate Yahushua, right? And then there's a whole story. They asked Yahushua to reinstate them with prophets. Anyway, it's a whole Gemara over there. But what we see from that Gemara is that even though Moshe Rabbeinu taught many people, and he taught the elders, and he taught Aaron, and Aaron had died already, but he taught Elazar and Isamar and Pinchas, etc., etc. It was specifically Yahushua who was the venue of everybody's frustration, because he was the one who was responsible to transmit it. And if he had forgotten 300 laws, so then he was the one who was responsible. Don't worry.
Is that why they wanted to assassinate him?
Yeah. No, because that's the part that he was. That's, I think the Brisker Rav may even say this, that he was responsible for it. That's
a little harsh.
Okay, so that's the whole. We're not learning that whole Gemara now. I'm just bringing the from that Gemara. I'm just bringing the point that we see again that Yahushua was the one who was responsible. If anybody is worried that there might be some very important halachas that we don't know, don't worry. The Gemara says that Kalev reinstated them with the 13 principles. So we got them.
At work we have this concept of single point of accountability.
Oh, that's here.
Is that what Yeshua?
Tell us more about that. What is single point of accountability?
That's the person who doesn't necessarily know everything. But if you got a problem, that's the person you go to, and they're supposed to solve it. Figure out who to contact if they don't know the information themselves. But they're held accountable.
Interesting.
So maybe he didn't.
He is the single point of accountability. I like that. I like that idea.
But that person doesn't necessarily know.
Well, here it's different. Yahushua is supposed to know.
Knew everything and he forgot.
He's supposed to know.
Even though there was some redundancy in that information, because others were also learning from Moshe.
Yeah, but it's Sivahu Olav, like you pointed out. Yahushua is the single
One entrusted
with the thing.
And it's interesting. So, in order to get back these halachos that were lost, it wasn't Yahushua that ended up doing it; it was someone else. So
yeah, but it was done with the Shloshas Hamidus and the participation of the Sanhedrin as per the rules of those, as per the parameters of how that works.
Right. I'm just saying that it seems like there's different talents.
Yeah, I think they said that this is. I don't remember all the details of the story. That was whoever was going to be successful in doing it would marry. I don't want to say because I didn't look up the Gemara recently and I don't remember the details. Okay, now, so much has been made of the fact, and Mark mentioned this right at the beginning, that we're mentioning here the Besden. So why does the Rambam mention the Besden? So to start off with, the Rambam himself addresses this question in a letter which he writes to Reb Pinchas Dayan, which is I think it's actually the first of a series of letters, but it's a letter responding to criticism on the Mishnah Torah. And basically the Rambam says, you're accusing me of such and such, how could you accuse me of such? How can you accuse me of that? You didn't even take the time to read my book. If you read my book, I explicitly address that, or explicitly, or at least implicitly, address it, whatever it is. So, in that letter, the Rambam writes that the reason why I keep on mentioning the Besden is in order to demonstrate that this is not just like one person received from one person, how do you know if it's really true? The reason we know it's really true is because it wasn't just one person from one person, it was many, many people. So after Yahushua, you have this Kenim, and then after it was Kenim means men, is Kenim Rabbim. The Rambam writes Kenim Rabbim, many elders. And then it's everyone in the Besden, and the Besden, and the Besden. And later on you have, I'm not going to spend the time now to control F and find it, but somewhere here, the Rambam has the word alafim or revavis. Thousands and here we go. It's on page. I don't know if you count the page numbers here, but over here it says. There are great sages who were part of the court of Rabbeinu HaKadosh who received the tradition from him. His sons Shimon, Gamliel, Ephes, Reb Chanina, Reb Chamer, Reb Chiya, Reb Yanai, Reb Kapara, Shmuel, Reb Yechon, Reb Hoshea, and these and thousands and myriads of other sages received the tradition from Rabbeinu HaKadosh together with these great sages. Okay, so there's the emphasis here on the Besden because the Rambam is trying to emphasize that it's the many from the many. This is a sort of a test to the legitimacy that this is something which was. So on the one hand, we have one person who is responsible for the transmission to it, but he's in partnership with his Besden. So, he's the Rosh Besden. The leader of each generation is the Rosh Besden, who has the primary authority and responsibility, but the Besden are also a part of it.
Yeah, isn't it also that many people attack the Rambam for writing the Mishnah Torah, and he validated it by saying the Bais, not just the individual of each generation.
Yeah, there were many. In the lifetime of the Rambam, there were many challenges to him, including to his writing of the Mishnah Torah. And I mean, in that letter, they said, you're writing the Mishnah Torah as if we don't have to learn Gemara anymore. And the Rambam writes, what are you talking about? I'm not against learning Gemara if you have the skills for it, and I myself teach Gemara to people. And it's a fascinating letter. Anyway.
Yeah, but it was based on something he did right.
What do you mean?
He gave the impression that you could have the Torah, my Sefer will be enough, and it sounded like it was.
Yeah, no, there's no question that the Rambam. Yeah, okay,
it was sufficient.
The Rambam's attitude to Gemara, learning Gemara, and the Rambam's attitude to Mishnah Torah. I mean, the Rambam definitely felt that his Sefer was. He writes to one of his students, "You should learn the Sefer again and again and again, and take it with you wherever you go." Okay, now, again, so I mentioned already before. And
one has to do with knowing the halacha, the other has to do with learning for its own sake. So they're two separate things.
Right.
So I'm not against learning for its own sake. Lishma, I teach Gemara too, but the halachas, like I said, you probably don't need to go anywhere else.
Right, and he splits up the day, and one of those things is
the Rambam also
Talmud, and that is
but the Rambam also I read that letter very quickly yesterday or the day before, but. I think the Rambam is saying that Gemara is only for people who are cut out for it.
Right. Well,
so for the masses, we have Mishnah Torah.
It's hard to argue at that point. Gemara is very hard.
Well, nobody's arguing that Gemara is very hard. The question is there value in it for the masses? The Rambam seems to hold there isn't, but I believe that most Gedolei Yisrael held that there is.
Clearly,
the Rambam. I mean, part of his time. The Rambam. He goes into the whole thing. One of his kindness on the Rambam is why the Rambam doesn't attribute halachas to the Tano, to the authority that said this halacha. Anyway, again, we could do another time. We could go through the whole letter to Pinchas Dayan. All right, now, as I've already mentioned, and again, I could go through the introduction and show you, or you could do it yourselves. Read the whole introduction properly. You'll see it's very clear that there's three functions of the Besden, of the Sanhedrin of each generation. Number one, to transmit the Mepi Hashmor, the oral law. Number two, to transmit what they have figured out in each. I'll actually just read to you one line of the Rambam that's kind of the introduction to the Rambam kind of consists of four parts, if you will. First is the part which is called the Hakdama, the introduction. Then he has the count of the positive mitzvahs, which matches his count in the book of mitzvahs. Then you have the count of the negative mitzvahs, and then you have the count of the whole order of the Mishnah Torah. So all 14 books and how each of the 613 mitzvahs are in the order that they're going to be in the Mishnah Torah. So at the end of the third of those four parts, at the end of the count of the negative mitzvahs, the Rambam says, these are the 630 mitzvahs that were told to Moshe. I'll read in Hebrew and translate. These are the 630 mitzvahs that were told to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. Them and their detail and their general rules and the details and the details. All of those general rules and detailed rules and very detailed rules and the explanations of each mitzvah, he Torah Shabbal Peh, that is the Torah Shabbal Peh, shekiblu Besden mipi Besden, that each Besden received from the Besden.
So he's consistent in his language.
The Rambam is king of being consistent in his language, and that's another point which I'm hoping to get to in a moment. And then there's mitzvahs acherish and ischadru achamat Torah. There's new mitzvahs that were created after Matan Torah, such as reading the Megillah, Ner Chanukah, Tainis Tisha B'Av, and then there's also, he doesn't mention it explicitly here, but it's mentioned previously, the things that are deduced with the Shlosh Esrei Midas, with the 13 principles. Now, in Hilchos Mamrim, it's the third to last set of halachas in the Rambam, right before the end. So Mamrim is based on the word Zakin Mamre. It's rebellion, and it's all the laws of those who rebel against the Torah. Here's how the Rambam introduces this. Hilchos Mamrim, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph. Besden HaGodel Shebirushalayim, the Supreme Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim, Hem Ikar Torah Shabbal Peh. They are the Ikar, the essence of Torah Shabbal Peh. Ve'em Amudei Hara, they are the pillars of instruction. U'mehem Choyku Mishpat Yotzei L'chol Yisrael, and from them, law and ordinance, paskening, goes out to all of Israel. V'aleya nifticha Torah. Translate that word, somebody.
The Torah entrusted. Right?
Whoa. Good one. You just said a tremendous chiddush without even realizing it.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the chiddush I said.
Okay. Aleya nifticha Torah. Well, the book I'm reading from, the English Rambam I'm reading from, says, concerning them the Torah promises. Right? Aleya nifticha Torah, concerning them the Torah promises. Shenemar Al pi haTorah asher yerucha, and he quotes here a verse from the beginning of Parashas Shoftim, which is the mitzvahs of setting up judges and courts, that you should do according to the laws that they instruct you. Harezu mitzvahs say this is a positive commandment. Okay, so firstly,
positive commandment?
The positive commandment to do according to what the Besden tell you to do. Okay, so the normal way, before Ari came along, what was the normal way of translating those words were Alei nifticha Torah, concerning them the Torah promised. So it's to say this is a positive commandment, which is a bit of a non sequitur, right? Is that the word? Is it a promise or is it a positive commandment? Is Hashem promising us that we will have a Sanhedrin, or is He commanding us to go to do what the Sanhedrin tell us to do?
Oh, like Avtacha, right?
Right? Now, let's go back a second to the beginning of this halacha and read it. Who said before? I think that the Rambam is here alluding to three things. Besden HaGodel Sheb'Yerushalayim, Heim Ikar Torah Sheba'al Peh. They are the essence of the oral law. What does Ikar Torah Sheba'al Peh mean? They are the thing of oral law. What is the oral law? If I tell you the oral law, what does that mean? The Rambam has defined that term very clearly on his introduction. The oral law is the explanations of each mitzvah that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai, but were not recorded in writing. They were transmitted. Tefillin have to be square.
Halacha Moshe.
Halacha Moshe Sinai, Me'Piyah Shmo. So number one, the Sanhedrin are Ikar Torah Sheba'al Peh. Like the Rambam says, the Besden of each generation are responsible to transmit the Ikar Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Then he says, V'heim Amudei Ha'hira. They are the pillars of instruction. What does pillars of instruction mean? Pillars of instruction means that when we have any doubts, we come to them, and they determine our doubts by employing the tools of the 13 principles. And I don't have it here. Anybody have a Rambam very quickly accessible on their phone? Okay, it doesn't matter. I'll just say it from memory. It's in Hilchas Isurei Bia, I think it's Perek Yud Aleph, where the Rambam describes how, according to Torah law, there's a different, not all blood that a woman sees makes, there's nida and zava. Nowadays we have everything, we call it nida, but whatever, depending on exactly what day of her cycle she saw that there was blood, there would be different laws. And the Rambam says that I think Yud Aleph.
Keep going.
And the Rambam says that was the case when they had a Besden HaGadol, and whenever there was a doubt about whether or not this blood was category A or B or C, they would go to the Besden HaGadol and they would determine all the different types of blood. But now that we don't have that to fall back onto, so we had to create a system which was much simpler to stick to, and that's why we have the system that we have today of the laws of family purity, where there's no difference of whatever she sees blood, it's just 5 days, 7 clean days.
There were like kinds of reds even that were allowed.
There were kinds of reds, but more importantly, there were different days of the cycle. Okay, so that's the second part of the Besdin. That you have a doubt, you don't know what to do, you go to the Besdin, and they tell you what to do. And that's, I think, I'm suggesting, the Rambam's alluding to in his second ones. V'heim amudei ha'hara, they are the pillars of instruction. And then he says the third thing, U'meihem choyka mishpat yotze l'chol Yisrael. From them, choyka mishpat emerges or goes out to all of Israel. That's the thing that the Rambam says here, that they create new laws. They tell you, okay, from now on you have to create Purim, you have to create Chanukah, you have to wash your hands, you have to keep Tisha B'Av, you have to make an Eruv. So the Rambam is referring to those three things. And then he says, Va'alehan, you found it? Yeah, thank you. And then he says, Va'alehan hifticha Torah, like Ari translated, not concerning them the Torah promised. The word hifticha can mean promise, but it could also mean, like many of you learn, shar habitachin. What does that mean? The gate of trust. The Torah trusted them. The Torah relies on them to be the transmitters of those three things, as the Rambam elaborated on in the Hakdama. And then he brings the pasuk and he says, "Zu mitzvah saseh." Now there's no contradiction. It's not, is it a promise or a mitzvah? The Torah relies on them, and therefore we have a mitzvah to listen to them. And by the way, here in the Rambam that I just mentioned to you as well, the Rambam uses the same expression, "K'moshe hifticha Torah aleihen," concerning that if a person had a doubt about the blood, he would go to the Supreme Sanhedrin and ask them, and again they translate here as the Torah promised concerning them, but I think a more accurate translation would be as the Torah has relied on them, that whatever they tell you, whether the blood is pure or impure, you should rely on them.
The same word.
Yeah. Now, mentioned before that the Rambam is the king of consistency in language. So the problem with this reading of the Rambam is that in most places in the Rambam, where the Rambam uses the word haftacha, it means promise. Now, I don't know if it's such a big problem because sometimes the by the way, I have a there's different ways of searching Rambam, but one of the apps I have that you can search Rambam, you put in a word and it gives you anywhere you have the same root. So if I put in Haftacha, so I get all the results of where it says Haftacha, and also all the results of where it says Avatiach, which means a gourd or a melon. But anyway, but they're not hard to separate. Yeah, it's not like you have hundreds of results. You're talking about 20, 30 results. It's easy to think. So, by the way, for example, if you Google this, how many primary colors are there? Right, digit. Whatever. So how many? Seven. How many primary?
Primary colors.
How many primary colors there are?
Primary colors. That's it.
Maybe I'm using the wrong word of primary colors. But for example, in our minds, red, pink, and orange, and brown are 4 different colors.
Right.
But in other societies
of the primary color.
right, but in other societies and in other generations and other societies, those may all have been considered as one color. And just like I think purple is a color, and my wife thinks, well, there's purple and violet and indigo, and then she sees them as fine maroon, and they're all different colors, right? So the difference between all I'm bringing out. By the way, this has a big halachic ramifications because when it comes to the colors of blood. When we're reading ancient shuvas about it, when they say red, they may be referring to what we call today brown.
Oh, it's like when you go to Home Depot to buy white paint. There's 27 different types of white paint.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right?
Oh, he's saying the chumrah, right? They would.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to get sidetracked.
It's possible that.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, so here's the question. What I'm asking is there really a difference, such a big difference between the word promise and the word rely? They're both the same idea. You could rely on this, you could think. But I have a suggestion to make. All the other times in the Torah where it talks, in the Rambam, where he mentions God promising, it's Hiftiach Hashem, for example, by Moshe Rabbeinu, Hiftiach Hakel Bekach. Hashem promised him in this. Or Shiftichanu b'Torah, Hashem promised that everyone would do tshuva. Okay, we're not going to go through all of them now. There's only one other time. I just showed you 2 times in the Rambam where it says Hifticha olav Torah. The Torah was maftiach on it, which I'm translating as relies on it. There's only one other time where you have that exact formulation in the Rambam, and that is in Hilchos Malachim about Mashiach, where he says that where he describes the process of a king becoming Mashiach, and he says if he does X, Y, and Z, he is Becheskas Mashiach, he is assumed to be Mashiach. And then it says, but if he is not successful, then which is normally translated as, we know that he is not the one concerning whom the Torah promised. Right, now, what is the function of Mashiach? So this is a topic which I believe we've discussed before, and it certainly deserves its own class, and it's fascinating to see how the Rebbe goes through the Rambams about Mashiach and uncovers layers upon layers of detail over there, which on the one hand you could have never figured it out without the Rebbe, and on the other hand, once you learn the Rebbe Sichos, it's like staring at you at the face, and obvious that that's what the Rambam means. But the point is that the function of Mashiach is to restore the completion of Torah. He restores the Davidic dynasty, he rebuilds the temple, restores Karbanos, sacrifices, he restores the Sanhedrin, he's Koife, Kol Yisrael, he influences all of Israel to follow the ways of the Torah.
So he fulfills the promises of the Torah? He is the Besden, he's the leader of the Besden of his generation. Rambam Minchas says that he teaches Torah to the whole nation. He's a greater prophet, almost as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. So in many ways, the Mashiach is there to pick up where the Sanhedrin left off. We had the Sanhedrin, the Besden, from generation to generation to generation, who were upholding the 3 elements of tradition and also Shoitrim, enforcing the law.
And then, around the destruction of the temple, a little before, a little after, there's in different stages, the Sanhedrin ceases to be. And everything unravels from there. We don't have the opportunity to do all the mitzvahs. We don't have when there's machlokas, we don't have the ability to have a uniform decision that unites all Jews the same way. We're not able to do all the mitzvahs, etc., etc. Comes along Moshiach and he picks up all of that. And he creates a unified Jewish people. He creates a Sanhedrin. He creates a king. He creates an environment where we could actually fulfill all 613 mitzvahs. V'olav hifticha Torah. The Torah relies on him to bring itself, the Torah, to complete fruition. L'chaim.
I just want to say, you don't have to take one interpretation and say that at the exclusion of the other one.
I agree.
It's both. I mean, Hashem is promising us something, but there's also the part that He's also entrusting us to fulfill this mission. There's a mission Hashem is giving to Mashiach, but also Hashem is trusting Mashiach.
Right, but here's what I think, because I saw in the Mifal Mishnah Torah Rambam, they also translate this as entrusting and not promising, but I think they have it a bit wrong. They say, not about Mashiach, about the Sanhedrin, they say, Hiftichanu b'Torah aleim, that the Torah tells us to rely on them. Mm-hmm. No, I don't think the Torah is telling us to rely on them. Hifticha Torah aleim. The Torah, it's Hashem himself, and the Torah itself is relying on them to be accurate transmitters of the Torah, of God's will. And that's the same role that Mashiach plays.
Right.
One guy's saying...
Right, it's... Go ahead.
I was just saying, one guy's saying, I was right next to Moshe, and I got it directly from Moshe. The other one says, well, I got it from the student of Moshe. So the one that you take